You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 109 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. 109! Well, we're flying through this. Hey, on today's show, we're finally in All-Star Weekend break, which means that I'm not going to be covering the All-Star Weekend at all because it's pathetic. Instead, I'm going to go through some of the historical topics that I've wanted to discuss for a long time. And who better to bring on than Mike Frye? Mike Frye is, obviously you guys know, an author. And even though he would deny this, I would say he's an expert in 90s basketball. And today's topic will be talking about the greatest centers in the 90s. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back on, man. I love being here.
Here's the reason I wanted to get you on, right? Because I appreciate the 90s. I don't think it was, believe it or not, I don't think it was a golden era for centers. I think the 60s was a golden era of centers. However, when you look at the 90s, you had such it was definitely a great era for when it came to center. Because you had Shaq, who was not yet in his prime, but still very, very good. David Robinson won an MVP award. Hakeem won. We don't need to mention the awards that he won in just a 2-year period. You also had guys like Patrick Ewing, Alonzo Morning, and then you got other guys, Hall of Fame players like Dikembe Mutombo. I mean, you've got a lot of great players. So what I wanted to do in today's episode is very similar to what we did in the top 5 playoff performances, individual year playoff performances of all time. So we're going to have our top 5 list. We're going to go through our top 5 list, and we're going to argue and debate it. So, Mike, you cool with that?
I'm cool with that.
All right. Do you want to kick us off with number 5 on your list?
Number 5. Okay, I'm going to go with Alonzo Morning. Alonzo was just he was the first in the next tier. And I know we're going to get to that tier, so I'm not going to mention the names, but he was like the next best center outside that first tier. And, 17, 8 and 1. I think he averaged 1.1 assists, but he had like 2.8 blocks. He was a force defensively. I mean, when I think about 90s ball and I think about toughness, I think about guys like, Anthony Mason, Charles Oakley, but Alonzo Morning is up there for the bigs. As far as a tough big, a guy who would literally throw an elbow into your throat if you tried to come into the lane. And he didn't smile either. I don't think I ever saw Alonzo really smile much until he was, an executive with the Heat. He was just tough. He played the game in an angry manner. He was a great defensive player. And again, we're talking about an era where you could camp out in the lane because even though there was illegal defense, the big man you were guarding rarely left the area where you would have to come out of the paint in order to not violate the illegal defense rules. So, you had a guy just in there. We talk about this a lot with Jordan and, the LeBron debate, where's there more spacing near the rim? I mean, it's not even close to me. But Alonzo was one of the masters of that. He always was near the rim no matter what. And if he did find himself outside the paint, he always got back in. He was just a really tough player, and he would be my number 5. He just ran into, the same thing a lot of guys did. They ran into the Knicks. They ran into the Bulls. There were just some really good teams in the East that the Hornets never really could elevate themselves past that first round. I don't even know. You would know better than me off the top of your head if they even got out of the first round.
Yeah, they did. They did in '93 when
maybe okay. 93.
When it was Alonzo's rookie. You remember he hit that shot against the Celtics.
Yep, that's right. I do remember. I watched that game. That was a great game.
Yeah,
but
that was before I was born.
Yeah.
How do you not remember that then?
Well, I mean, I remember the game, and I can't remember the. It's hard to.
All right. I'll give you that.
To meld together. All right. Because unlike you, I don't know everything. So.
Well done. I like it, Mike. Look, so straight off the bat, we're going to have differences. I have Patrick Ewing as number 5, so I have Alonzo at number 4. I'm assuming that you have Ewing at number 4.
I do.
Okay, so let's go right into this. Let's compare the two. So I'll talk about everything you said about Alonzo is 100% correct. he's very undersized. He's 6'9", 6'10", built like a. The dude was a warrior. And I don't mean a Golden State warrior. I mean a genuine warrior. This guy, the toughness that he would display going up, because being 6'9", 6'10", he was going up against Shaq. He was going up against Robinson, Ewing. These guys were huge. He was giving up 30 to 40 pounds and a few inches on these guys, and you could never tell that. You could never tell that that's actually what he was doing. The toughness that he brought as a rookie, right
out of the gate. Right out of the gate.
I mean, for some reason,
that good.
He's shot blocking and everything like that. You mentioned the Charlotte Hornets with Larry Johnson and Muggsy Bogues. Think about how undersized they were at all those positions. Larry Johnson was only 6'7". Muggsy Bogues was like, a midget out there. He's 5'4", 5'3", whatever.
Not allowed to say midget anymore. He was a little person.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, all right. He was a little person, but he wasn't that far off being technically.
He was a dwarf.
Oh, he was a dwarf. There you go. But the fact is that team was tiny, and they didn't get a whole lot of toughness from the other positions. Maybe Kendall Gill, but Del Curry wasn't a tough guy. So where did that toughness come from? It came from Alonzo. And I think back to where he laid out Scottie Pippen, and he had to do something like that. That's what basketball was back then. You had to pay a price if you were going to just waltz down the lane every single time. And Alonzo wasn't that big of a guy, but he wasn't afraid to throw his body around. I put him up there with Charles Barkley and Allen Iverson as unique players at their position, all-time unique players at their position, just because of the height disparity.
Yes.
So I'm going to go straight into the Ewing comparison, and we'll just throw it back and forth at each other, because I think this is a great conversation to have. The reason I have Alonzo over Patrick is I think Alonzo Morning had less to work with than what Patrick Ewing did. Now, when I say that, I'm fully aware of how good Tim Hardaway was in '97. Tim Hardaway, All-NBA first team, top 5 in MVP voting, all that good stuff, right? However, before he got to Miami, the dude was playing off the bench behind B.J. Armstrong in Golden State. It's not like they picked up an MVP candidate. They got him really for spare parts. Alonzo Morning, along with Pat Riley, helped create the environment for Tim Hardaway to really explode and flourish. So I'm not going to give too much credit for Tim Hardaway for that. Of course, I give him credit for recovering from his injury. But you take Tim Hardaway away from it, and I look at what Alonzo was able to do with what he was given, as opposed to Patrick Ewing, who had that beautiful jump shot. He was 7 foot tall. Sure, he had players that weren't that good either around him, like John Starks, Derek Harper, a lot of throwaway talent there. Derek Harper wasn't bad, obviously, but you also had Charles Oakley, tough guy, right? But then I think back to 1997. They pick up Larry Johnson, of all people. They pick up Allen Houston. They still have John Starks coming off the bench. They still had Charles Oakley coming off the bench. They had a wealth of talent, and yet they still couldn't get the job done. If you lined up who Alonzo had as opposed to who Patrick Ewing had, you would say the Knicks had they had a lot more talent. However, of course, that series will always be marred by the P.J. Brown, Charlie Ward incident, where a lot of players got suspended and all of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got nothing against Ewing, but I never saw Alonzo come up as short as what Ewing did in big game situations. Alonzo wasn't a big game player like Hakeem was. Very few players were. But that being said, when you've got a 7-footer waltzing down the lane against the Pacers, and all he has to do is dunk the ball, and they win Game 7 at home, and instead, for whatever reason, he tries a finger roll.
It was his big blemish on his career. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I would disagree with the John Starks thing. Now, he was a little shorter than today's two guards, but he was pretty good. I mean, John Starks had some pretty good years, and he was also tough.
Yes.
You had a guy at the guard spot that almost guarded, I wouldn't say as good, but close to a Bruce Bowen on his ability to on-ball defend. And he was tough like that, too. Just wouldn't let you have a play off. And he went at Jordan. Now, he knew he was never going to beat Jordan, but he never shied away. And, so you had and I would say that the reason he had that, maybe he gave a little bit of that to Patrick, but they were bullies. They were all bullies. And you could say that Patrick Ewing was the king of the bullies. You know, he was in there, you know. Now, Alonzo was just tough. He didn't care about bullying you. He just wanted to beat you up. I mean, It was just, I know that sounds like it's the same thing, but it's really not. Patrick Ewing always had something that he had to prove, whereas Alonzo was like, no, I'm just going to beat you because I like beating you up, you know. And so, you know, but these guys had a bully swagger to them. And the reason why I can't put Zoe ahead of Patrick is, one, for me, watching the two, I thought that Patrick had a little bit more fluidity in his game. I wouldn't say he was as sturdy, hopefully, for lack of a better term, as Alonzo. It wasn't as thick, you know. They talk about it with quarterbacks, you know, how small quarterbacks are either like dainty or they've got that pudding to them, like Baker Mayfield and, you know, Russell Wilson. So if you're undersized from a height, you know, example, or from a height stance, you better have that pudding on you so you could take a hit in the pocket. It's the same way with basketball. I would say that Alonzo had a little more pudding, even though he was shorter. You know, you could see a little bit more flailing with Patrick Ewing. But from an eye test standpoint, the stats favor Patrick. He went further in the playoffs. He had better teams around him, but only slightly. I mean, it's hard to find guys that were better. I mean, don't forget that the Hornets had Del Curry, too, who was an excellent three-point shooter.
Yeah.
They had J.R. Reed. They had some players. They had very good chemistry. They just ran into the Bulls and the Knicks. And I always kind of thought, you know, I mean, for me, Zoe, if he wanted to be ahead of Patrick, he would have had to have done that a little bit more in those first couple years. But, you know, he was young. So, they came, what were they, 5 years apart at least? No, actually 7 years apart. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to compare them because, you know, they had, you know, by the time Patrick started losing some of his skills, you know, Alonzo was really coming into his, I would say his prime. It was coming into the Heat years, you know. I mean, he was, when did he go to the Heat? I mean, that was
96.
That was 95, 96. So he had played 3 years in Charlotte. You know, it's like, Andy had Pat Riley, and you were getting that. You had the Kurt Thomases, and you had some of these guys who played for both. I know, but you know, you had that toughness that Pat Riley brought. And I always thought that the late '90s Heat were the early '90s Knicks. I didn't see there was much difference, other than the fact that I thought that Patrick Ewing was just a little bit better than Alonzo. I mean, he never had a guy like Tim Hardaway as his running mate, and he still was able to at least push. He didn't just make it, you know, far in the playoffs. They actually went to the finals one year, and they pushed Michael, you know, very hard. And like you said, he just had those blemishes on his record, like that finger roll and some big. And the reason why I think that Zoe wasn't a big game performer because he didn't ever make it really that far. So for me, including the whole pie, I just have to have Patrick ahead, especially when you go into, you know, the LeBron fan favorite stats. If you add that onto it, for me, growing up and watching the two men, now it's close, but I always thought that Patrick Ewing should be in the conversation of greatest centers of all time, whereas I wouldn't include Alonzo in that conversation. I would put him just outside that tier. That's just me, though.
No, that's fine. It's interesting you brought up stats because I did a little bit of research of this, and Ewing from 86 to 97, and this the reason I went to 97 is that's the start of the 97-98 season is when he broke his wrist. So that was the first major injury that Ewing had. I wanted to compare that sample to Alonzo from his rookie season up until when he was diagnosed with kidney failure. So Ewing, over that a 900-game sample, it's a bigger sample than Alonzo's, but we're just going to have to deal with it. 24 points per game, 10.4 rebounds per game, 2.8 blocks per game. They're both similar when it comes to shooting percentages too, by the way.
Yes.
For Alonzo, it's 21 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, 3.1 blocks per game. So they're almost identical, but not quite. Ewing does have a slight edge in terms of points per game. What separates me, though, is two things. Alonzo should have won the MVP in 1999. This is one of the great swept under the rug stories in NBA history. We all remember it was a lockout year. Miami was the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. There were reports coming out that Alonzo had won the award. It had been leaked. However, they got knocked out in the first round. And then, mysteriously, the award didn't go to Tim Duncan, who it probably should have gone to anyway, including Alonzo. But it went to Karl Malone, who had one of his worst years. Actually,
that was a career achievement type of award.
Yeah, it was weird. It was really strange because outside of his rookie year, because Karl Malone wasn't that good in his rookie year, he developed as he continued to play and continued to work on his game. That was probably his worst year, his worst season. So that's number one. So honestly, we probably should have one MVP award for Alonzo Morning. The second thing is when Alonzo came back from the kidney ailment, he played a huge part in the Miami Heat 2006 championship. Now, on paper, you might think, hold on a second, that was Shaq and Dwayne Wade. It really wasn't. It was Dwayne Wade, and Dwayne Wade's second best player was Alonzo Morning. The greatest quote I've ever heard about Alonzo Morning was just after that finals loss, Jerry Stackhouse, who was a member of the Dallas Mavericks, he was coming off the bench for the Mavericks, he said, and Shaq was not an absolute bum at this stage, right? He never really was until he went to Boston and he tore his Achilles. But Shaq was not, he was still an all-star, he was still close enough to his prime. And he said that the Mavericks they were happy when Shaq was on the court because it meant Alonzo wasn't on the court. They could not contain Alonzo's energy and shot blocking. So just think back to the 2006 finals, especially Game 6, and what happened after Miami had won 3 straight to give themselves a lead. They had lost the first 2 games of that series. They won 3 straight in Miami. And then Game 6, Dallas comes out, and they're hitting everything. They're making everything. They had a double-digit lead. Alonzo comes in like a man possessed. He's blocking every single shot. And I'll never forget that block. I think it was on Jason Terry, where he starts... I think the commentator accused him of hyperventilating. No, that's just emotion. That was all emotion. When he blocked that shot, because he had to hustle to get back down the court. I think Jason Williams turned the ball over, and he had to hustle to get down there, and he just got there, and he blocked Jason Terry's shot. That was all emotion. I was thinking about everything that this man had been through, from being adopted multiple times as a child to having to go through Georgetown. John Thompson obviously mentored him, and being undersized and being at the top of the NBA elite around the time that he got the kidney disease, and then everything, and then all of a sudden he's on the verge of a title. They still have about one final step to go over, and he is delivering big time. And I just think about that emotion, and I compare that to Patrick Ewing, and maybe this is just a personal preference. It's close. But as a personal preference, if I am starting a team, who do I prefer? And I would prefer Alonzo because I see that. And then I compare about the big game moments for Patrick Ewing, the finger roll or passing the ball to Charles Smith, who got blocked about 50,000 times underneath the basket by the Bulls. and I think, who do I prefer in that situation? It's just Alonzo.
Yeah. I could see, based off of just those 2 moments in a snapshot, I could see that. But like I said, when I go for the whole career and I go with watching these 2, and battle it out, like I said, it's not for me. There's not a huge, Grand Canyon size hole between them or a gap. It's very close. And like I said, what you're talking about is what I praise Zoe for. He was tough.
Yes.
And but like I said, it's undeniable that Patrick Ewing was the man on his team for a lot of years. He put up some great seasons. I mean, his best season, I still think, was the 89-90. 28.6 points, 10.9 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 4 blocks per game. I mean, now they got ousted in the second round, though, and that's always been the knock on Patrick, right? That's why he's not, in the conversation of the next 3 guys. And I think that's fair. But they beat the Celtics that year in the first round with Bird and McHale.
Oh, that was the year he hit the 3, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And so that was not the finals, but they're beating the Celtics. Now they went and got beat 5 games by the Pistons, who were really, really good too in the midst of their back-to-back championships. And but he just ran it. I always thought that Patrick Ewing, he was just born in the wrong era for winning a championship. I mean, the guy, he had to play against Michael and the Pistons and the Celtics. You're like, he's just almost up there with those guys, but he's just not good enough, And to be a big man and doing, like I said, I think that skill-wise too, just skill set, he had the whole game. He wasn't for a center in the 90s. He wasn't as good as Hakeem, but he had that little fadeaway jump shot. He just had everything. He just didn't have the big moments in his favor. And so I would say, for me, I'm a big eye test guy. For me, when we're talking about lists, with GOAT Envy, I included everybody's kind of criteria. I wanted to include the whole pie, not just what my standard for GOAT was, but what other people's are as well. And I still had MJ on top. But if I'm going by my own, Michael Frye's, personal GOAT list and GOAT standards for different positions, for me, it always is going to go back to what my eyes see, as unobjective as that may seem. When I look at Patrick Ewing as the basketball player, and then I look at Alonzo to me was just a step slower, probably a little bit tougher, but that shouldn't take anything away from him. He also had a jump shot. He had a whole game too. He was very good. I just thought that Patrick was he edged him out a little bit. That's a good debate, though. It is a good debate.
In all fairness, for Ewing, I'm going to make a point for Ewing, just so people know that I'm not trying to just win an argument here. How differently would we look at Ewing had John Starks not gone 2 for 21 or whatever it was?
If they beat the Rockets, it's completely different. And that's what I tried not to be swayed by.
Yeah.
Of course, I would say it. It's everybody's cherry on top. Well, he's got the ring. Well, he beat Hakeem.
That's the big thing as well.
That would have been huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, and I'm this way with Michael too. The 6 rings to me is the legend. It's the cherry on top. It reflects how great he was, but it's not everything. For me, when I watched him play the game, I've never seen a more complete basketball player at any size, at any position, than Michael Jeffrey Jordan. I've just never seen a guy that could do it on both ends with the tenacity and also the finesse that Michael Jordan could do it. He was the complete player. I feel that way when I compare other players from different eras, whatever it may be, within the context of the rules and, the differences in the eras, it still always goes back to what do my eyes tell me? And so for me, if I had the first pick and I had those 2 centers from Georgetown to pick from, I'm probably taking Ewing, but yeah, I would give some thought to Zoe. There's no doubt about that. The guy was great. He certainly was. And that's why he's in the top 5. And there were some other very great centers. And you know what? I'd put him above some other centers in some different eras as well. But for me, I would disagree with you. What you said in your monologue was that the 90s was not the golden era for centers. I understand what the 60s had. There's no doubt about that. You got Will Kareem and you have Bill Russell. I mean, you had others too. But, I would say that because I feel like there was a vast difference in guard talent and wing talent, and the whole game, positions 1 through 5, point guard through center, was played the way a textbook would say that the game should be played in the 90s, with high athleticism and talent, to also have big men that were just the giants out there, the 7-footers that could hit 15-foot jump shots, that could stretch the floor a little bit if you needed them to. They were athletic, I mean, Hakeem, was otherworldly. But to see that, I think it's the golden era for centers. And I think that if you put Patrick Ewing in any era, he's probably top 5 in any era and for centers. I believe that, unless you put them all in the same era, but if you put him in the 60s, I'm going to put him in the top 5. I'm not going to have him as high as those top 3, but I'm going to have probably at 4. That's probably where
it's an interesting point you brought up.
Other than Bill Walton and his very short run, but go ahead.
Yeah, the reason, allow me to clarify what I mean by the golden era, right? So you had similar talent levels at the top for the center in the 60s and the 90s. You had Kareem hadn't come in yet, so we can't use Kareem because he was in the 70s. But you had Will.
That's right, he was 71. Yeah, that's right, 71. Yeah.
So you had Will, you had Russell. You also had guys like Nate Thurman. You had Willis Reed. Nate
Thurman was a freak. Willis Reed,
absolutely. You had Willis Reed, Wes Unseld. You had all these guys. But what makes it the golden era to me is the lack of teams. So these guys are constantly playing.
They dominated everything.
But not just that, but they are constantly playing against each other. They weren't going up
Yeah.
against Luke Longley. I know
Yeah.
it's sacrilegious for an Aussie to say this, right? They weren't going up against Stacey King, or players the lower echelon, the Sean Bradleys or anyone like that who were at the bottom tier of the center position in the 90s. They were constantly going up against Hall of Famers at that position, and that's why I think that was the golden year.
Yeah.
So
And I can agree with that sentiment. I would just say guys like Luke Longley, I mean, my goodness, they were bottom tier. But, if the game was still played that way, and I very much mean if, and I mean this is the last 6 or 7 years it's really changed. Luke Longley, I think in 2009, would have been one of the top 7 or 8 centers in the league, easily. Like, not even close. Because he would have been a body, he could shoot the 12-footer. He was not bad on defense. He was not terribly slow. He was just Luke Longley. He was from, he's just, you didn't think of him as much in the 90s because you had all these other great centers. And I would just say the depth in the 90s, because, it's different though, right? You brought it up. There were less teams, so it's kind of apples to oranges. There weren't as many teams that could have even took on a Luke Longley because they didn't even exist, maybe. So I can see, but that's a good debate within itself too. Which is a better era? I mean, it's very close.
But
it's a good point. I hadn't heard that really. We don't usually hear that from people because they don't know the history of the game as well as you do.
But we should. Next time I get you on, we'll talk about that. But that's an incredible point about Luke Longley if he was playing in 2010. Now, people might think that that's an extreme point of view, right? It's kind of the reverse of what we hear now.
90s ball.
But here's the thing, right? We can actually substantiate that with evidence. Think back to the 2010 NBA Finals. Boston Celtics versus the Lakers. The Boston Celtics were up 3-2. What happened in Game 6? Kendrick Perkins, who you could probably compare skill and size with to Luke Longley, tears his ACL. That changes the entire dynamic of that series.
And he wasn't as good on offense either.
He was hopeless on offense. I remember when he was in Oklahoma, and I'll never forget this. I think it was a first-round series up against Memphis, and Memphis is really giving it to him, right? They're battling them, and I think Durant missed a game-winning shot. I think it would barely graze the rim. Kendrick Perkins gets the offensive rebound, goes up for a layup. He's wide open, mind you. He's wide open. Everybody, this is in Oklahoma too, everybody is holding their breath and just praying to God that he makes a wide open layup. This guy was so inept on offense. Great on defense, but so inept on offense. Now, you could compare Luke Longley to Kendrick Perkins. I would have said if you put him in there, he'd be better than Cedric Perkins. And that was my point. I mean, There are guys like Mark Gasol who I think are better. Powell, those are guys that I would have said definitely better than Luke Longley. But Luke Longley wasn't that far behind those types of guys. Yeah. He passed the ball very well for a big man out of the triangle. He was a decent rebounder. He held his own against the top centers in the 90s. It wasn't like he was getting... now the stats would say, those other guys were much better, and they were. They had more skill, talent, but he could hold his own for a quarter here or there. He wasn't going to get bullied around by those guys by any means. And so that's when I say that's the 90s era. I'm not only talking about the top 4 or 5 guys. I'm talking about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So let's move along to number 3. And Mike, as you did number 5 and I did number 4, they were kind of merged together. I'm going to go with number 3, and this might surprise you nearly as much as me putting Alonzo ahead of Ewing, and I've actually got David Robinson as number 3.
I concur, sir.
Okay, so that didn't surprise me. That's surprising that it's not surprising. So I want to hear why you have. I'm assuming you have Shaq then as number 2.
Yes.
Okay, so why do you have Shaq ahead of David Robinson?
Again, going back to my point earlier, eye test. Mm-hmm. For me, David Robinson was never the player that Shaq was from day one. Shaq was a force the moment he stepped into the league. I don't know what his stats were exactly from 92 on to 99, but if you watch the two play, now don't get me wrong, I love David Robinson. In fact, he had a more complete game than Shaq. But anytime you talk about Shaq, you have to talk about dominance. And it supersedes some of my other criteria for completeness. He was just so darn dominant, and he moved like a guard when he was a rookie. I mean, he could take the ball coast to coast. I'm over exaggerating a little bit, but
we saw him do that though. That's not.
Yeah, but we did. I mean, he was a great passer. He knew the game, high IQ. I think all these guys had high IQ, but Shaq to me was just a force, and it's just for me, as good as David Robinson was, and he was great. I mean, when you look at some of the more advanced stats, like career leaders and win shares, he's number 2 to Michael Jordan. I mean, I don't say this one lightly. In fact, I had to go back and forth this, but at the end of the day, I'm like, David Robinson, well, he didn't win anything really until the shortened season, and you're like, Shaq was there playing Hakeem. Well, why couldn't David Robinson get there? It was kind of like Patrick Ewing in some senses. I felt like he just couldn't get up over that hump. You had the Suns when Barkley hit the big three. You had moments where I thought the Spurs were going to do it, and they just couldn't do it. And then when they got Timmy, that changed things. It allowed them to advance on. And Tim Duncan was great as a rookie coming right out. But it's close for me, 90 Shaq versus David Robinson. But I had to put David Robinson in my third spot. I couldn't put him ahead of Shaq. Not Orlando Magic Shaq, not any Shaq. I just couldn't do it. Yeah, maybe the Cavs.
He wasn't too bad either until LeBron got him. He was good on the Suns, not the Cavs. Look, I think it's a really good point you brought up about the dominance of Shaq, and he was a handful. People did not know how to defend this guy. We've never seen it. It was kind of like Jordan when Jordan first came into the league, or when Magic came in.
Seen anything like it?
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing that resembled it was maybe Wilt Chamberlain, just from a purely athletic standpoint. Of course, Wilt had the complete game. He could, shoot a jumper. Couldn't shoot foul shots either, but he could shoot a jumper. The thing about Shaq, and I talk about his deficiencies on offense, he should have been a better rebounder. With that kind of explosiveness, he should have owned that paint the way that Wilt Chamberlain owned the paint. He should have just gotten pretty much every single rebound. How could you box this guy out if he was motivated to get every board? It would be very difficult. Now, David Robinson, what you said is right. He did stuff the stat sheet. I'm looking at his numbers. I looked up some numbers just a second ago here because you brought them up. From 1990 to 96, so that's his rookie year up until his back injury, 25.6 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, 3 assists per game, 3.6 blocks per game, 1.7 steals per game. That's pretty impressive. However, we do have to, because to me, you need to have some kind of playoff success to substantiate those numbers.
Sure.
He never really had that. Even in his rookie year, they had their hands full up against the Lakers with, I think Eddie Jones was a rookie. Nick Van Exel was a second-year player. Vlade Divac was probably their best player. And they were pushed to 6 games in that. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is how badly Olajuwon completely dismantled him. Now, the counter to that is, well, Olajuwon also outplayed Shaq. That is true. Yeah. However, he did not outplay Shaq to the same level that he outplayed David Robinson. He was putting up 35, 15, 5 blocks a game on David Robinson. He didn't put those numbers up on Shaq. If you just look at the statistics, Shaq was right there with Hakeem. Now, of course, Hakeem did play him better than what Shaq did. But the point that really put Shaq over the line for me is after that back injury, Robinson was never the same. It wasn't even close. And it's disappointing to say that. And I do give David Robinson a lot of marks for being able to realize that, hey, Tim Duncan's in, I'm going to take less shots and all that. But, he went from those numbers to 19.2 points per game. This is over a 3-year sample, by the way. 19.2 points per game, 10 rebounds, and 2.4 assists. Those numbers just don't cut it when we're talking about him versus Shaq. Now, Shaq did also struggle at times, especially in the playoffs. He got swept a lot of times. And one of those times was at the hand of Robinson and the Spurs. But, if it comes down to who am I picking? The same way that who am I picking between Alonzo versus Patrick Ewing? And if I'm going to go with Alonzo, I'm also going to go with Shaq with this, because Shaq, it wasn't the old Shaq. It wasn't he wasn't in his prime either. But he could give you 30 points and not take a shot outside the key. And teams just couldn't stop that. They could not stop that. The most athletic player, athletically gifted player in the history of basketball, without question to me. And it makes you wonder how good he would have been, that being Shaq, had he had a Phil Jackson for all of his career. Had he had him in the 90s, what would have happened? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, David Robinson didn't have great coaches either. Let's not kid ourselves with that either. But his game was a lot more refined, and he had the self-awareness to work on his game. He had a jump shot. When we're looking at just players that you line them up and you have no idea what their skill sets are, and David Robinson walks in the room, you're probably taking him number one overall out of every center that's ever played the game. The guy moved like a gazelle, but he'd never... there was a quote, and I shared this on some of the social media accounts from Hakeem about Shaq, and he said that there were big players that play small, like they're small, and there are small players that play big. Shaq is the first guy that he came across who was a big guy that played big, and I thought that was really telling.
No, that's a good point. What I kept thinking of was David had less pudding. He was built. He was a freak. First off, he might have been the nicest guy ever in the NBA too. By the way, he was Tim Tebow before Tim Tebow.
Oh, don't say that! Oh my God, don't say that! Don't compare him to Tebow.
No, I'm just saying personality-wise. I mean, you can't. You look at this guy, you're like, wow, that's a really nice guy. Always smiling. It's just almost childlike. In a sense. Just like very innocent. Just the nicest guy. But he had less pudding than those guys. He got moved around a little bit by Shaq. Of course, everybody did. I always thought growing up that David Robinson played the game a little bit more like a four-man did in the 90s because he had a little bit more range on his jump shot. He could move. He wasn't as fluid and agile as Hakeem was in his post moves. He was a little bit more robotic. But he did everything fast. And, but like with Ewing, you're just like, why didn't that translate into championships? Some guys just don't have, and this is what Team LeBron doesn't understand. They don't have that gene. It's that I'm going to will my team to victory gene, no matter what. When things aren't perfect, I'm going to still win. And yes, you're going to still have some losses, but you're never going to let that count you out. And David Robinson, to me, was just kind of like go along to get along guy a little bit when it came to that. He just didn't have what Hakeem and Shaq had. Now you could say, well, when he got Tim Duncan, he won a championship. Okay, well, when Shaq got Kobe, he won a championship. But at the end of the day, like I said, less pudding. He didn't have it. He just didn't have the dominance. He couldn't match up with Shaq. And like you said, Hakeem historically just dismantled him. And but then you look at his stats. You go to the stat stuff, and you're like, man, win shares per 48 minutes. Michael Jordan, number one, at 25.05 per 48, and 25.02 is David Robinson. So he obviously had a very big impact on his team. It's just when it came down to the playoffs, could he push it over the hump like a Michael could? And ultimately he couldn't do that. And so you have to knock him for that. Whereas Shaq, when Kobe was still, coming of age, Shaq was just going nuts in, 99, 2000. And, like you said, he didn't have to leave 8 feet, and he's still getting you 30 points. And just that dominance factor, I have him edging out, 90s, even 90s Magic, Shaq is higher to me than David Robinson. I mean, he got further than David Robinson did in his third year in the league.
That is very
so,
true. I'll give you that.
So.
And also, considering you just brought up like moments and clutch moments, this is not a clutch moment. But have you ever seen a more vicious facial dunk than what Shaq served up on David Robinson in the 96 All-Star game? Have you ever seen a more savage dunk?
That was nasty. Just was nasty. And Shaq was doing it to kind of prove a point. Like,
yes.
I can do this to anybody.
Yeah, because David Robinson at that time was considered the most athletic guy in probably the league. That included Jordan, that included Hakeem.
For his size, he was a freak. I mean, people talk about Giannis. That's David Robinson. That the fluidity thing's different. Giannis has got a little bit more agile. But, I mean, come on, 7-footer, doing what he's doing out there, moving the way he could. I mean, it was incredible. It was a thing to watch. But, again, you're including, like I said, to me, he played more like a power forward.
I can't stop thinking about that play now, man. I'm laughing in the background. I'm just thinking about that dunk. Because
so bad.
Because if you haven't seen that dunk, I'll briefly describe it for you. Please look it up if you haven't seen it. I think it was Grant Hill is leading a break in semi-transition, and Shaq was a trailer, and he lays it off for him, and David Robinson. This is in San Antonio too, by the way, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
So David Robinson's a hometown hero and all this stuff, and David Robinson's at the front of the rim. David Robinson gets up for this. Let's not forget that his elbow is at the rim. He's way above the rim, and Shaq goes up so high, and he just holds the ball. It's like he's frozen. Shaq is frozen in time. He's just like holding it, and then it's one of the most powerful dunks you'll ever see in your entire life. David Robinson, as you said, is one of the strongest guys, one of the quickest guys that's ever played basketball. He goes into maybe the second row just from the bodies colliding. It is. Tell me where the lie is. Right Tell me where I'm lying.
It's nasty.
It was,
and it wasn't even two-handed. It was one-handed.
Yeah.
That's how powerful Shaq was. I mean, he basically just tossed David Robinson aside with his dunking hand. It just made him look like he was Muggsy Bogues. I mean, it was nasty.
And as I said, it was in San Antonio. David Robinson is revered to this day in San Antonio, and that crowd was in awe, as you should be. As you should be. Michael Jordan, who was on the bench at the time, he got up and he was laughing. When have you ever seen Jordan get up and laugh at something like that? It was like, it wasn't a laughing at Robinson. It was more of a, I can't believe what I just saw. And the scary thing about it, speaking about laughing, the scary thing about it, Shaq's his second All-Star game. His first one was when he was a rookie. His second All-Star game was when they were trying to freeze him out. The West had enough of him. The West had all those centers, and they had enough of Shaq rapping and all this stuff. So they tried to prevent him from scoring. I mean, they were doing the Hacker Shaq in the All-Star game. And towards the end of the game, Pippen threw him an alley-oop, and he went up and caught it left-handed and dunked it all over Hakeem Olajuwon. And I swear to God, look this up. I did a video on this years ago. The camera pans to on the bench, the West bench, and David Robinson is laughing. Of all people, David Robinson. And 2 years later, what do we see? What the biggest facial in NBA history. I'll go that far. So, look, Shaq all day, even though he doesn't have a jumper, even though he didn't like to get up pick and rolls, the pressure that he puts on a team defensively, he forces teams to collapse. I would go with Shaquille in the 90s, and that's not even close to his prime. As you said, 2000, 2001, 2002, that was by far and away his prime, but I will clearly go with Shaq.
Oh, yeah. And I love David Robinson, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
He is 90s ball to me.
You know what?
As much as Michael Jordan is almost. David Robinson's like, wow, like when you think about how great the 90s were, David Robinson. And guess what? He was the third best center. He wasn't even at his position. I mean, that's how good the 90s ball was. It's like you're talking about guys here that I think in any era would have been great basketball players. And they're not even the best of their position. I mean, they're like they're third, fourth, fifth down on the list.
It's scary, isn't it? But speaking of David Robinson, man, if he ever ran for president, I would vote for him. He's a good guy. He's a really good guy.
How could you not vote for him?
But I'll leave you to reveal your number one pick, because it's clearly the suspense is killing me.
This one's gonna surprise you. I don't know.
George Murason. Big country. You gonna go big country?
No.
Vlade? Oh, okay. Okay. Marcus Camby, maybe.
Well, obviously, Hakeem Olajuwon is not only my top center of the 90s, he is my top center all time.
Oh, stop it. You're killing me, really?
Yes. Oh, yes. He is my top center all time. I don't think any center played the way that Hakeem could play the game. His array of moves with the basketball in the post is unblockable. To me, Kareem's skyhook was no more unblockable than Hakeem's corner fadeaway. You can block it. He's a 7-footer. He's shooting a rainbow over your head at 7 feet. You couldn't block it. You couldn't do anything. And when he went away from that, he just spin his way through the lane. He was he was like a ballerina, and he was still big enough to go toe-to-toe with Shaq. And you're like, just has there ever been a more complete center than Hakeem Olajuwon? Let's throw all the stats out. Obviously he's got the 2 championship rings. That validates a lot of what I'm saying. And I know that comes with the Jordan wasn't here, thing attached to it. But my goodness, I mean, and Shaq even tell you he's the one guy I couldn't figure out. That's Hakeem Olajuwon was that one guy. And I would say that Wilt and Russell and anybody else would say the same thing. How do you guard that guy? How do you guard him? I mean, what? So I'm going to block your shot if I'm Wilt and I'm near the rim. Okay, well, he's just going to take you 8 feet out, 10 feet out, and just go between his legs and spin on you, and and then either do his fade and then go back baseline and dunk on you. He just had such a wide array of skills for a big. And, for me, and I wouldn't say it's hands down. Obviously, I'm not disrespecting all the other greats at center. It's a great debate. In fact, it's even more fun to me than Michael, LeBron, Kobe. Michael, to me, is above everybody. But you get to the centers, you're like, boy, we want to have a really fun debate. Let's talk about Hakeem in the conversation of the greatest, because for me, he's my top center all time. So, so no doubt, when you told me to put this list together, he was number one right off the bat. It wasn't even a consideration. It was just the guy was otherworldly in his talent as a big. And so, yeah, I'm going to leave you with that.
Look, to me, you've nailed a lot of things there, by the way. His baseline fadeaway was unstoppable, but it's because he had about 50 counters to that baseline. If you tried to take that away by beating him to that spot, he's going to just drop step you and shoot a jump hook. Or he's going to, cross you up like he crossed up David Robinson and then put up a ball fake and then another ball fake and then another ball fake. And then, David Robinson's like in a popcorn machine almost. He's jumping all over the place. It was, look, I called the 94 and the 95 seasons Hakeem's reign of terror on the NBA. Because sure, Jordan wasn't around. But I did a post on this recently. I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, where I talked about who he went through in 94 and 95. No player in NBA history, since it's been 4 rounds to win a championship, has gone through a Hall of Fame player at every single round to win back-to-back championships. Not Jordan, not Magic, none of them. Have they ever had to go through every single round and a player being a Hall of Famer? First, in the 94 championship, he had to go through Drexler. Then he had to go through Barkley. Then he had to go through Carmelo and John Stockton. Then he had to go through Patrick Ewing. The next title, he had to go through Stockton and Malone again. Then he had to go through Barkley again. Then he had to go through David Robinson again, who was the MVP that year, not just a Hall of Famer, but he was actually the league MVP. Then he had to go through Shaq, and Penny should have been a Hall of Famer if injuries didn't get in the way.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, Hakeem, in his prime, is, and I know this is saying a lot because you could make an argument of Shaq in his prime being the best of all time, like his peak just being that much better than anyone else's. I would say that Hakeem in his prime is the best center of all time. And it's not necessarily just because of the numbers. As big game situations, who do you trust? I trust Hakeem Olajuwon every single time. I trust him in a big game just as much as I trust Jordan in a big game. And it's a fun situation if you start to weigh up what would have happened in 94 or 95 had the Bulls played the Rockets, Jordan versus Hakeem, because they cancel each other out. Obviously, they don't guard each other, but big game situations, big moment situations. You talked about clutch situations. Do you trust guys like David Robinson? David Robinson kind of had a way of not getting in his own way, but not stepping up. LeBron has the same problem too, by the way, where they don't go and make the plays to make sure they win. Hakeem Olajuwon was like Jordan, or maybe not as good as Jordan. Jordan went out of his way to just disrupt everything. Think of Karl Malone, for example, at the end of the '98 finals.
Yeah.
But Hakeem's right there, man. He's right there. He doesn't have like the game winners.
For bigs, he is. For bigs, he is. He reminds me of Jordan.
Yeah,
like Jordan does to the whole game. Hakeem is to centers. But go ahead.
Well, what I was going to finish up was defensively, Olajuwon does not get the credit he deserves. Everyone talks about Jordan being the first guy to get 200 steals and 100 blocks in a season.
He did it twice.
Yeah, well, he did it twice. Yeah, you're right. And Pippen's done it once, and as has Hakeem. But you know what's funny? Let's flip that stat around. Let's make it 200 blocks, 100 steals. Do you know how many times Hakeem has done that? 11 times. He's done that 11 times. That's incredible. And
it is. It's right up there with Michael's 10 scoring titles. I mean,
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's right up there.
I'll finish up and I'll hand it back off to you, because then we can talk about, and I think this is a good impromptu discussion, is Olajuwon's place in history amongst centers all time, not just the 90s. But when we look at the talent level, and you know, you got guys that didn't make this top 5, right? So you got the Vlade Divacs, who we made fun of, but I mean, Jesus, if he was in today's game, we'd be talking about him like he's Marc Gasol.
He's better than and I would say he's better.
Absolutely, from a passing standpoint. From a passing, you could run your offense through him.
That's why I had Vlade on my list to talk about in the greater list. Rick Smits, Vlade, some of these guys. I mean, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. Or Dikembe Mutombo, let's not forget him. He's a Hall of Famer too.
Exactly.
So maybe you're right, by the way. Maybe you're right that this was the golden era of centers when you just look at the pure depth. But the point that I wanted to make is when you look at all these, and you're a historian, whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, I'm a historian too of the game. And the only question when I said this should be our topic for when you come back on, the only question was where do we rank 2 through 5? Number 1 was not even a debate. It was clearly number 1 was going to be Olajuwon, and you talked about putting him in. You talked about putting Patrick Ewing in any other era, he'd be in the top 5. You put Olajuwon in the top 1 or 2 in any other era.
No doubt.
And overall, I'm not just talking about center. Overall, he'd be 1 or 2.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, when you think about Michael's era, who's the next guy? Now, today's fans will say, well, since it's not a wing, then that means that Michael didn't play against any competition. Well, no, it's just that we had an era of big giants that were really, 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 really good, and they impacted the game. That's what made Michael's run so special, is that he did it largely without a big guy of note, in the best era, in my opinion, of big men, in a league that was dominated championship-wise usually with great big men. And it was just unheard of that a shooting guard that had the most points in the league could win championships. And part of the reason why Michael is where he is because of Olajuwon's presence. He's part of that whole narrative. And, I mean, but this is a fun one. I would just say this, much like if you had to simplify it down to one thing, you had to make one defensive stop. And you had Michael on any player, any guard, any wing from any era. Who are you going to take to guard that guy? I'm taking Michael Jordan, because not just because he wasn't quite as quick maybe as Gary Payton, but he was close at 6'6", but the tenacity. And then you go to, and I'm like, who would you put on defense against somebody? I'd say, in the post. Probably going to go with Olajuwon. He's right up there with the defensive centers of all time. And then when you flip the script, okay, on offense, I'm taking Michael Jordan one-on-one against anybody. I don't care who it is. I need that shot. I'm taking it. If I had to feed it into the post, and I'm 8-10 feet out, and he can either face up or play back down, I'm taking Hakeem Olajuwon over Kareem, over Wilt. I'm taking him over anybody if I need that basket, because I know he's got more answers to whatever defense he's going to be facing, because he can hit any shot. And he had a move for it. Like I said, his array of moves was incredible. For me, throwing the stats out, just eye test wise, I'm like, man, could Wilt really stop Olajuwon? Could he? I mean, now Wilt was a beast. I'm not saying he wouldn't give it to him. He would give it to Hakeem too. I mean, it would have been a great battle. The same with Kareem, Could Olajuwon block the skyhook? No, of course not. But when I think about the array of talent on both sides of the court, yeah, there's not a more complete center to me, and that's my standard. It always has been that way with Michael. Who's the most complete basketball player? Well, I'm not going to ignore 50% of the game, which is the defensive side. And then when you go to the 10 scoring titles, like the win shares and the player efficiency, all that stuff, the final shots, all that. Come on, I mean, it's Michael. I would say it's like that for me with Hakeem a little bit. And remember, Kareem goes down to injury. Magic Johnson fills into a slot, who's also top 5 all time. He fills in beautifully at the center spot.
As a rookie, let's not forget.
As a rookie,
yeah.
As a rookie, and you're like, so was his impact there? Yes, but I mean, come on. I mean, you take Hakeem away from the Rockets. What
is Kenny Smith starting at center?
Yeah, exactly.
There's something I want to expand on that you just said when you talked about defensively. Is Hakeem's ability to actually get out on the perimeter too. So if you run him into a pick and roll situation, there's no advantage there. It's like Anthony Davis. If you run Anthony Davis, and we saw Portland try to do this, and that's why they were quickly dealt with and shown the door by the Pelicans in the first round. If you run pick and roll with Olajuwon has no problem staying in front of a guard, and not just blocking the shot or contesting a shot, but actually stripping the ball from the guards. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. I'll tell you why I've got Wilt and Russell ahead of Olajuwon, because that's a compelling argument that you have for Olajuwon. And I've got Olajuwon as number 3. I've got him ahead of Shaq, and I've got him ahead of Kareem. By the way, flip those in my all-time, by the way. Kareem is ahead of Shaq. But that being said, everything you said is 100% correct. However, when it comes to Russell, when it comes to Wilt, they can run an offense. You can run an offense through them, and they can set up their teammates a little bit better than what Olajuwon could. And
I would say that's probably true. Yeah, I mean,
Olajuwon's not bad at it, and we're really nitpicking at this, right? But
yes.
If Wilt was a better shot blocker, Wilt was the best shot blocker of all time. There's samples of not of his entire career. There's footage of about 120 games, and they've worked out. They calculated that he blocked, believe it or not, 8.8 blocks per game.
It's unreal.
It's unbelievable. Now, of course, there is pace of play. You've got to take that into account. I get all that.
Context, too. Did he ever play against Hakeem Olajuwon?
Well, no, he didn't. But he went up. He did go up against Kareem, though, a young Kareem. So that's part of it, too.
Yeah.
And also context on the other side, did Hakeem ever go up against Wilt Chamberlain? I mean, he went up against Shaq.
Oh, no, nobody ever has, unless you played against him.
Yeah, so I mean, it goes both ways there. So if I'm taking... So we've branched off from how good Hakeem was in the 90s. We know that. So now let's compare him against the other greats. And this is... A lot of people say, well, how can you even answer who's the greatest player of all time? To me, it's simple. It might be different for you, but it's who I would actually take on my team. Not, what's their accolades or what their statistics are or anything like that. Who do I want on my team? I want Wilt ahead of Hakeem because greatest shot blocker of all time, greatest scorer of all time, and that includes Jordan, unfortunately, as well, just from the sheer numbers. Now, of course, not in big situations. That's Jordan by himself. But in terms of just pure numbers-wise, Wilt is the greatest scorer of all time, and he tempered his
by
game.
The numbers he is. Yes, of course, but not by array.
Yeah, no, I've got you. I agree with you on that. Yeah. In terms of the versatility, and quite honestly, the versatility it goes to Hakeem as well over Wilt. But in terms of pure numbers, Wilt is the number 1 rebounder of all time, the number 1 shot blocker of all time, the number 1 point scorer of all time. He's the greatest passer from the center position of all time. That type of versatility allows me to have any teammates around him. You can have great teammates around him. If I've got a team that features Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and I've got Hakeem, can Hakeem make these guys better or as good as what Wilt can? And the answer to that question to me is no, because Wilt, you don't even have to throw the ball to him once, and he can get every rebound for you, he can get every block shot for you, and he can set these other guys up. That's the only reason why I have Wilt. If I'm going one-on-one, or if I'm starting a team, better yet, if I'm starting a team from scratch and I have nothing else, it's an expansion team, I'm going with Olajuwon because of everything you said is correct in terms of his versatility and what he can do on the court. The only advantage is I think Wilt can fit in better with better players. And the same goes with Russell, obviously, too.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that. There's just not much to disagree with there. The one difference I would have between Michael and Hakeem is that Michael absolutely 100% made his players around him, elevated them. I mean, there's no doubt about that. More than a guy like Hakeem could do. And in the greater debate, GOAT debate, this is why I exclude bigs. I think guys like Michael have the ability to make. Now, Wilt was very special. Like you said, he was an excellent passer. There's no doubt about that. In the greater context of the debate, I think that the athleticism was not the athleticism. Guys were still fast; they could still jump, but the depth of the league talent and athleticism, and the ball skills from the 60s to the 90s. I think there's a fairly significant gap, especially when you didn't have the integration as much of the ABA players that came in the 70s. I just think that it was a more complete league in the 90s. I think that some of the talent, like you said, now it was shrunk a little bit because you had less teams, so there's something to be said for that. But, as opposed to what the new school fan thinks, that somehow the gap between 1990 and 2019 is so wide, it's not near the gap that was between 90 and 1960, 61. There's a big gap there. And a lot of it has to do with, our knowledge of weightlifting and training and those things. But also just the kids were playing basketball more than they were baseball in the 90s and the 80s. And that was different in the 60s, And like I said, when you had the integration happen and with the ABA coming in the mid 70s, that gave an influx of talent, guys like Dr. J and some of these guys that I don't think had to play against as a depth of players like that. So I kind of always use that to knock Wilt, but it's not fair, I would say. I mean, what is he supposed to do? Time travel? I mean, there's nothing he could do. All you could say is that the reason why he's right up there with Hakeem is his sheer dominance and the numbers that he put up. You're like, could he still be the top 2 center in the 90s? Absolutely 100%. No doubt. I mean, him and Hakeem would be going at it. So, Wilt to me he's up there. I hold a lot of the same sentiments you do. I just say, in the greater context of things that were going on, it's hard for me to put him ahead of Hakeem, but the sheer numbers go, wow, I mean, what could he have done today? I mean, my goodness. I mean, he's a freak. I mean, he really was. And early Wilt he was athletic, man. I mean, he was really athletic guy. I don't think people understand it. And he was big. He was a lot like Shaq was,
He was a lot like David Robinson. He looked a lot like Robinson.
He had elements of both of their games, I would say. Yeah, absolutely.
There's one
but that's a great debate.
There's one thing I'd like to add to this, and then I've got another impromptu question, so prepare yourself.
Okay.
But light up that cigar.
You can hear my lighter.
Yeah, but the thing about Wilt is you're 100% right about the talent level. The game hadn't evolved. Like, we saw what Wilt did and Russell did. They really modernized the game, but we didn't see the effect of that until the next generation. Truly, we didn't. So, because it takes a generation before we actually see the impact, or at least a decade before we see the impact of the others, of the players before them. That's why I scoff I shake my head in disgust as what we're going to see in 10 years from now in the NBA. But that's another topic for another day, probably after a few drinks. The point is that I wanted to make is when Magic Johnson used to run summer league games down at UCLA, and Larry Brown told this story. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I'm going to share it with people. I'm saying it verbatim because I don't have it in front of me. But Magic would always stack his team for pickup games. And he had a team of Bernard King when he was at his prime, James Worthy, Dominic Wilkins, Michael Cooper, and a few others. So it was loaded with NBA All-Stars. Wilt had a couple of UCLA freshmen. This is when Larry Brown was coaching at UCLA. So he had freshmen and college players alongside him. And the Magic went up for a game point, and Wilt blocked him. And Magic says, "Oh no, next. That was goaltending. Game over. Next." And Wilt grabbed the ball from me and said, "I don't think so. That wasn't." And Larry Brown was watching on the sidelines, and Wilt said to him, "Was that goaltending?" He goes, "I don't think that was goaltending." So they're like, "All right, we're running it back. First to 11." So they ran it back. Every single shot that any of those players took, Wilt was blocking. And this is like in the mid-'80s, a good 10, 11 years after he had retired. And he's still owning all these players. That's why I'm like, dude, people don't get exactly... His game would have translated.
I agree.
And that's why I wanted to leave on that. Look, I'm not going to argue too hard against Hakeem Olajuwon. Hell, the center position, let's make it a top 6 and include Moses Malone, and then we've really got the top 6 of all time. You could pick any of those guys in any order, and you're not going to get too much pushback from me. A lot of people say, well...
I'm the same way. Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, how can you have Wilt ahead of Kareem? Or how can you have Hakeem ahead of Kareem? It's really not disrespectful. That position is so loaded. It's incredible.
The all-time greats.
But speaking of all-time greats, I'm glad you said that. Who is, if you're starting a team, every single player is available. But don't just go by, okay, these are my top 5 players of all time. You want this team to mesh. Who is your top 5 of all time, and include your coach to make sure they mesh?
Well, yeah.
I'll tell you what. I'll mention mine.
I'll start with.
Go ahead. I'll say mine, and then you can respond. So it'll give you a minute to actually think about it. Because as I said, completely impromptu. Center is Wilt. Power forward is Larry Bird. And the reason I have him as power forward, people think, oh, what are you talking about? He's a small forward. Actually, no. When he came into the league, he played power forward for the Celtics. Remember, Cornbread Maxwell was their starting small forward. It wasn't until McHale started to emerge as a superstar talent that Bird was so versatile in his game that he could go and play small forward. So his actual natural position, and Jordan backs me up on this, by the way, with various quotes saying that I don't know if he was a power forward or a small forward. So Bird at the power forward position. I got Dr. J at small forward. I got Jordan for obvious reasons at the 2, and Magic as my point guard, and I got Pat Riley as the coach because he got through to Magic like no one else did.
Yeah. Okay.
Good luck beating that.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I wasn't thinking Riley. I mean, he obviously did a great job with Magic. I mean, that's. He turned on the Lake Show. He flipped. He turned the switch on. That was Pat Riley. You got to give him credit for that. If I had to pick a coach, though, because like I said, I firmly believe that the Knicks, no matter what anybody says, in the '90s would have been good in any era. Now I don't know if they'd have won championships because they couldn't do it. They couldn't beat the Rockets, but they were darn close. But Phil beat him, and he beat him over and over again. So because Phil did it, not just with Michael and what he did, he also did it with Shaq and Kobe. I mean, if you're talking about...
He also did it with just Kobe, too. Let's not forget that.
And he did it with just Kobe. I mean, when you look at, the versatility that he had, now it was the same system. But maybe that's just how good the system was. It really was good for top-level talent. And I mean top-level talent that they could flourish in. And those teams were also great fast break teams. They weren't the Lake Show, but I could see how you might neutralize Magic a little bit out of the triangle. But I would go with Phil. If I had to choose a 1, it's certainly Magic. Yep. A 2 is certainly Michael. Mm-hmm. My 5 is absolutely Hakeem. So, because I get the defense, and the offense there, and all he has to do on this team is just sit on the block. And, when you're ready to feed it to him, like I said, one-on-one in the post, not taking anybody over Hakeem.
You could pick and roll with Jordan too, man. With Hakeem and Jordan.
Pick and roll. Gosh. Would there be a better pick and roll of all time? I never thought of Larry as a power forward because I think he played more years as a small forward.
He did. Yeah.
So for me, I would put Larry at my 3. Mm-hmm. Sorry, LeBron fans. I'm still putting Larry at my 3. It's a better rebounder. And I'm going to surprise you with this one because he's not in most people's top 5 for his position. And again, he's kind of like Larry. Don't really know exactly what position he plays. Is he a 3 or a 4? I would say he played more 4 than 3. And that's James Worthy. As a team guy, a guy who could meld with a team of great players. Think about the Lakers in the 80s. You had Kareem and Magic. That was your point guard and your big. And who was the glue guy? Yeah, who was the guy that could do everything else? I think it was James Worthy, and he validates that when Magic was hurt, and he put up 36 and 17 against the Pistons. Was that right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You know the stats better.
Big game, James. Huh? That was Game 7, wasn't it? I don't think Magic was hurt then, was he?
Was he?
Game 7? I think Isaiah was still hurt. Wasn't that the series that Isaiah got injured?
I can't remember. Honestly.
No, but I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. It was Game 7.
It makes you wonder if he was his own guy on his own team, what would his numbers have been? I think James Worthy is one of the top 4 or top 5 power forwards of all time. In fact, I've had him as high as 3 or 3. I mean, I go back and forth on it a little bit because he doesn't have the career numbers that maybe some of the other guys do. But then you look at his impact in the finals, and then you're like, man, on that team, he was just a great team basketball player. And he was big. He could guard the post, and he could guard the wing. And I've got Larry and him in there together. And then I bring in, Magic, Michael, and Hakeem. I just don't know how you lose with that starting 5. I don't see any other 5 that can beat that 5. But I got James Worthy. I wanted to put some respect on his name, because I really believe that much in James Worthy. I think he was much better than what his stats would maybe indicate because of the impact. Much like he's better than Bosch, but much like Bosch and Love, their numbers went down when they had to play with 2 guys who were going to dominate the ball, or at least the scoring. Underappreciated, I think, a little bit in that sense. But certainly an all-time great for me. And if you're putting together the chemistry, I'm going to put James Worthy in there. He could shoot it, he could pass it, he could defend at multiple positions. Yeah, I'll put him at my 4. Yeah.
That surprised me, James Worthy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to disrespect him though, because as you said, he's the type of player that would happily be the 5th option if he needed to.
Yes, and that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about chemistry.
Yes.
Now, am I going to take Tim Duncan over him? Well, of course I am. But when you're talking about game flow, you're talking about fast break and the triangle, you're going to talk about all of those things. Defense. Yeah, I'm going to put him in there. Oh, yeah, and I'm not going to skip a beat.
And on top of that, can he be effective as being the 5th guy? Could Tim Duncan be effective being the 5th option? Maybe. I mean, I could sort of see that, but
maybe not. Like I said, I watched this dude go out and put up 36 and 17 in the finals.
Game 7 of the finals. Yeah,
Game 7. I mean, he was the man, and you're like, wow. I mean, just imagine what he could have done with his own team.
And we were talking about Hakeem's ability and versatility. James Worthy had that footwork down low. He was a beast in the paint. People forget about his footwork, his ability to spin over either shoulder, to dribble with either hand. Very quick. He was Finals MVP against the Celtics. He tore up the Celtics that series.
And he's crafty.
Yeah, that too. Could finish with either hand. One hell of a player. I've got nothing but respect for him. However, Dr. J in his prime, because we've got very similar teams. We've got Magic, Bird, and Jordan, obviously. So let's talk about the differences. We've talked in depth about the differences between Wilt and Hakeem, not Hakeem, which is always was always great. I always wondered how that name changed just with one letter. But anyway, and so it comes down to Julius Erving versus James Worthy. Now,
but that hinges upon whether or not Larry plays the 4. I was going to go with a more traditional Larry as a 3. Yeah. So if I put him at the 4, and I'm going to compare Dr. J to James Worthy. It's close. I still may pick James Worthy because I think they're interchangeable.
Yeah.
All three of those guys. Well, I don't think Dr. J can play the 4, but you know what I mean.
Well, Dr. J was a hell of a rebounder. He played center.
He was
in the ABA.
Oh.
He was a very good shot blocker. The reason I've got not James Worthy, Dr. J in my starting 5 is purely chemistry. Because I'm thinking about it from 2 standpoints. One, rebounding. If I've got the best rebounders, I'm not going to lose. Realistically, I'm not going to lose. I mean, you can talk, well, Steph Curry can just dribble up and shoot from 45 feet with 3 players on him. There's nothing you can do about it, or anything silly like that. But if you have the best rebounders, you control both ends of the court. So I've got Wilt, the best rebounder. I've got Jordan and Magic, clearly the best rebounders of all time at their positions. Dr. J is the best rebounder at the small forward position of all time, if you just look at the pure stats. And then on top of that, you've got Larry Bird, who's not a bad rebounder, clearly not a bad rebounder. And then on top of that, you've got spacing with Bird. But the thing to me I could not turn down is if Magic Johnson is leading the break, after they've pulled down the board, Jordan is on one wing, Dr. J is on the other wing. How do you slow that down? And then, in addition to that, okay, even if you can slow that down, somehow you can slow that down, you got to deal with Jordan, you got to deal with Larry Bird, you got to deal with Magic, and you've got to deal with Wilt Chamberlain. How do you stop that? But on this, and I'm not going to say, my team's definitely going to beat your team or anything like that, because on the same token, you've got all those players plus Hakeem and James Worthy. That's equally as big of a nightmare to try and defend.
Because you saw James Worthy do it in the Lake Show.
Yeah.
You said you have Magic. I mean, you have direct evidence that James Worthy played very well within the Lake Show, and so to see that, your Showtime, you're like, well, I'm like, well, I have evidence of that,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Dr. J, obviously, he did it too. I mean, it's just like, but I'm going to put Magic and Worthy on the same team. I'm like, man, that chemistry was just so good. It goes beyond the stats a little bit. You've got more stats to back your side up. But, like you said, the teams are so similar.
I will say this.
It's hard to argue either way.
I will say this. If I was matching up against your team, I would drop Dr. J and I'd bring in Pippen.
Okay, yeah.
Just so I can put Pippen on Worthy, I don't have to worry about it. Because there is a question mark to me.
The defensive side of it, yes. Yeah.
And also he can help out on defense too. So if Olajuwon is burning Wilt, at least you can have Pippen rotating around and at least protecting the rim. Now, Dr. J could protect it too, and Dr. J's not a bad defender, but he's not Scottie Pippen as a defender.
Not as a defender.
And
no.
I want to get your take on this before I let you go, because you brought up James Worthy. And you brought up very good points about James Worthy. One of the great what-ifs in NBA history is Dominique Wilkins being drafted by the Lakers instead of James Worthy. To me, that's not a guarantee that they win anymore. In fact, I would say that, okay, on the break you might get some more highlights or whatever, but there's no guarantee that Dominique Wilkins actually fits into that style and is satisfied in being the third option for many years of his career.
Yeah, Dominique had a certain Stevie Francis quality to him, not in style, but in impact. It's just like he was like his own guy on his own team, and he didn't have a whole lot of help. It's a great question because you're like, what could he have done if he had Kareem instead of John Koncak, who's another decent pick, by the way. Hold on a second. And Kevin Willis, those weren't bad teams, but he had Doc Rivers. Yeah, it's some players, but
hold on a second.
Yeah, you're right though.
He also had Moses Malone. It wasn't just John Contract.
That's true. He did have Moses Malone. You're right. I don't think that they would win 5 with Neek. I think that's a fair. I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk, shut case. It's just, you're right. It's like, was he a better individual talent than James Worthy? I think that's fair in some ways. But, again, I'm looking at James Worthy on a team with great stat stuffers, still averaging 17.6 and 5 rebounds per game, 3 assists, an efficient player. 53% from the floor, a 2-point. man.
Okay, so here's a quick question, because there's no right or wrong in this. It's hypothetical.
No.
If you're starting like I said, the expansion before. So if you're starting an expansion before, do I go with Wilt or do I go with Hakeem? If you're starting an expansion team and you have the choice of James Worthy or Dominique, who do you take?
I'm trying to think what the hype would have been coming out.
Forget the business side. You just want to win games. Forget the business side.
No. I'm talking about. Man, that's tough. It's tough because James Worthy never got the respect, I thought. Even in college, I mean, everybody talks about Michael. I mean, James Worthy was there. I mean, it's just so hard. I'm trying to put myself in the mind frame of a GM there in the mid '80s, and I'm picking, and I'm like, it's hard to overshadow the excitement that Dominique would have brought to your franchise. Not from a business standpoint, but just like, could he be that transformative talent? Whereas I don't think you would have thought of James Worthy that way. My personal opinion is that I think that James Worthy was a more well-rounded player. And like I said, that 36-17, even though it's just one game, he still had pretty good stats and a lot of fun. Like you say, he's MVP one year. Going back and having that in hindsight, I'm probably going to edge out Worthy over Dominique. I have Worthy that high. I think Worthy, like when people talk to me about Scotty, and I'm like, well, wait a second, what about James Worthy? I mean, are you going to tell me Scottie Pippen was a more complete, better player than James Worthy? I don't think so. James Worthy was no slouch on defense. He wasn't the defensive stud that Scottie Pippen was. But you talk about the all-around game, the ability to pass and shoot the basketball, and to have an impact. Like I said, I'm struggling to find any time where Scottie Pippen would have put up 36 and 17 in a finals game. I'm picking James Worthy. Oh yeah, all day long. With Neek, it's just not to sound weird, but it's unique. I mean, it's a unique argument. You have a craft for that. I mean, it's a really good point. It kind of puts you in a pickle. You're like, who would I take if I'm a GM in the '80s? I'm probably taking Neek, but with what I know now, yeah, I'm probably taking Worthy. I think of that highly of him. I do. I think he played the 3 and the 4 as good as some of the greats. Certainly at certain times in his career. No doubt about that.
I'm taking Worthy too, and the reason I'm taking Worthy is I know if I get pieces around him, he'll fit in with them.
No doubt.
Whereas if I know that I'm just going to surround him with Doc Rivers and Spud Webb, and yeah, he did have Moses Malone, but he didn't do anything with him.
Yeah, and Moses Malone was on the tail end of his career too.
Oh, not quite. He was winding down, but he was still an all-star. He's
still a good player, but yeah, I mean, he wasn't early '80s Moses Malone.
No. Yeah, he wasn't anywhere near that. But
no.
The thing about the Pippen versus Worthy comparison is you're 100% right that Worthy wasn't the defender that Pippen was. However, the gap between their defensive abilities is nowhere near as big as the gap on their abilities to score consistently. You talk about the 36 and 17 that Worthy put up, and let's not forget who that was against, by the way. That was against the Detroit Pistons, one of the best defensive teams of all time, in terms of their depth, at least. Especially you had Rodman. I mean, my goodness, to do that against that team. Beyond that, when have we ever seen Scottie Pippen put up a 30-point game in the NBA Finals?
Well, I think he had one, and Tony Kukoc was the other one, by the way, LeBron fans. Twice in 6 finals that happened. Kyrie had 3 in a row in 2015 or 16 . So
6 finals appearances, not 6 finals games, by the way.
Yeah, not games, appearances. Michael had two games where he had a teammate that scored 30. So let's just.
Well, what game was that? By the way, what game was that?
Oh, shoot, I can't even remember.
Was it
I was looking it up. Man, it's really hard to remember because it just doesn't stick out in your memory. It's like
keep talking. I'm going to try and find this game.
Please do. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, when I look at, and one of the things for my own personal criteria for the GOAT debates, various positions, like I'll go to football. Jim Brown to me would have been as good today as he was in the 60s, even though he played in the same era that Wilt Chamberlain did in basketball. He was still 6'2", 235, could run a 10-flat 100-yard dash. You don't think he'd be tough today or in the 90s? Jim Brown would have been a stud. He was always translated. to me, Scotty really, really, really benefited from Phil Jackson way more. Now, from a winning standpoint, Michael did too, but from a talent standpoint, Michael already had proven almost by the time Phil arrived that this is something that we've never seen. I mean, he's just incredible. Scotty never had that, and he was a little bit older when he left the Bulls. But like you said, when have we ever seen that? He had a nice year, 93, 94. LeBron fans love to point out that one year. It was a nice year, but he couldn't get out of the second round. I mean, he wasn't a guy who could be the man in any offense. Whereas I think guys like James Worthy, Michael, they're going to be good in any offense you put them in. You put James Worthy in the triangle. You don't think he can pass as well, better than Scotty? Yeah, of course he can. I mean, come on. Like you said, the gap on offense is much wider than the gap on defense, and so like I said, I struggle to see. I know that Scotty's darn near schizophrenic on the GOAT debate, but I mean, it's hard to take anything he says. Like MJ fans, they're like, "See, I told you, Scotty said this," and a month ago, LeBron fans, "See, I told you, Scotty said that." It's a little exhausting at this point. I thought he made a good point about the extra gene, the winning gene. I think he's right about that, whether or not he is schizophrenic on the issue. But it's for me, he's been elevated a little bit. There's a guy on radio here in Columbus, Mike. I don't listen to a whole lot of local radio anymore. What's his last name? Anyway, he grew up in Chicago. He said he always laughed when somebody brought up Scottie Pippen. He's like, Scotty was, not near as good as what people said he was. This was before the LeBron GOAT debate. Now, I disagree with him a little bit. I thought Scotty was a special player. But what has amazed me is in the last 9 years, because of the GOAT debate, somehow Scotty has reached these ridiculous heights in fan lore. And I'm like, I don't see it. I see Scotty as exactly what he was. He was a great defender who averaged 16 points a game. He was a very good player. But my goodness, just because you hate Michael Jordan, you don't have to make Scotty out to be something that he's not. He is what he is. He was a good player, but transformative in any way, shape, or form, I would say no. He's never gonna. He's not gonna lead for different reasons. He's Dominique. He's not gonna ever lead a team to a championship. You can't build a team around him. It's just not going to work with Scottie Pippen. So I love Scotty. I never trashed him. I still don't trash him, but I'm not going to make him out to be something that he is not. And he was a great defender who could score a little bit. And like Phil Jackson said, he was a sometime shooter. Yeah. Sometimes he made it, sometimes he did. That's what he was.
Look, there's quite a bit to unpackage there. I'm going to talk a lot. No, it's fine. No, I told you to talk. I gave up on looking up the 30-point games.
Oh, it's hard. You want to take an hour.
You want to talk about schizophrenic schizophrenic behavior. Just look at his final stats. One game he has 26, the next game he has 11. It's like, whoa, Jesus. But the thing that I wanted to address, though, is you talked about how Pippen had a great year in 94. And this is true. He did have a great year in 94. But it didn't change who he was offensively. And if you want proof of that, down 2-0 against the Knicks, Game 3 is at home. They're down by a point with a second to go. Maybe it was give or take half a second, so it might have been half a second, it might have been 1.5 seconds. I don't know. I can't remember. But they're down a point. They lose this game. They go down 3-0. Phil Jackson, one of the great basketball minds of all time. Who does he go to? He doesn't go to Pippen. He goes to a rookie. What does that tell you about how consistent Scottie Pippen was as an offensive player, as a scorer? It tells you everything you need to know. And it tells you everything you need to know about Phil Jackson, too, because the plan worked and Kukoc made the shot. The other thing that I wanted to mention, too, is I agree 100% with you about the elevation of Pippen by LeBron. Let's call them LeBronites, these worshippers of LeBron, who just look for anything to try to discredit Jordan, to bring him down, rather than to organically allow LeBron to go up. Because LeBron is on his way down. No doubt. The same way that we saw Jordan, I guess, semi-hurt his legacy in from a perception standpoint, at least, when he played with Washington, we are seeing that with LeBron now. We've seen this from LeBron since 2016, to be totally honest with you, where his peak was 2016 in terms of his legacy. Now it's starting to come down. Everyone says, oh, the cement's still wet. We don't know how good he's going to be.
I disagree. He's on his downturn.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's absolutely on his downturn. Now, when the cement is still wet, people don't seem to get this. You can go two ways, up or down. You're not guaranteed to just pile on. There's a yin to every yang. If you play terribly from that duration out, that's going to affect your legacy. The same way that if you play great, that's going to affect your legacy. So the point that I wanted to make, though, with Pippen is, I think when you see this kind of contradictory viewpoints from him, I think he's trying to play both sides because he wants to be remembered, he wants to be loved.
Yeah.
But
he loves it.
I did an entire podcast by myself on this, talking about how weird this is and how the jealousy is seeping through with Pippen when he's doing this. The jealousy of Jordan. Jordan was the guy that... Look, I really appreciate Scottie Pippen's game. I love the role playing. I love the ability to set up his teammates, to be the secondary creator for that team in terms of initiating the offense. His ability to defend all five positions, by the way, not the LeBron all five positions where he goes for the weaker guy. We saw Scottie Pippen guard Patrick Ewing. We saw him guard point guards before, where it was
he was long. He was very long. Yeah,
he was a great player. But the fact of the matter is, and it hurts me to say this because he's a bona fide Hall of Famer. He deserves it. He deserves to be in the top 50 of all time, or the top 75 when that happens in a few years. He was a role player. He was never the star. Yeah. And even when when the show was his, who did Phil Jackson go to? He went to a rookie. He went to a rookie.
Yeah. Anyway. I'm glad you brought up Scotty likes it, because he does. And that's why he was like, I was LeBron before LeBron. Well, sorry, Scotty, you're a 16-point a game guy. LeBron's a 27. For all the reasons that I don't prefer LeBron in a lot of areas, LeBron is an incredibly efficient. He's one of the all-time greats. I mean, to say that is like, oh, I kind of like this. I like the team LeBron's talking about me like this because I was LeBron and Michael had LeBron. Before, so he liked it because it kind of elevated him in his own little weird quabble with Michael, which I think is just more of a jealousy thing. And we saw that on display when he was trying to be traded by the Bulls, But then Scotty, just like he is with the GOAT debate, he was the one pointing to his Jordan shoes when he was like, come on back to the camera. We all remember that. He still liked being around Michael. I think that Scotty's probably a really good guy. But like LeBron, he's a people pleaser. He wants to make people around him happy, but he struggles with his own, inferiority or security, that sort of thing. And
maybe he was LeBron.
That's why you hear him say stupid things like LeBron says stupid things, But as far as his ability, like LeBron, he's not as good a ball handler. He's not as good a shooter. He's not as good a passer. I mean, come on, defense, I'll give you that. But come on, as far as the complete game, LeBron's, it's not even close. But he likes it because it elevates him and makes people think about how great Scotty was, and who could blame him for, whatever. I know he's had some rough goes in his life, but, it's just funny to me how elevated he's become in the last 5 years. Specifically, you're like, before Pippen, Michael's record was this. My goodness.
Oh, my God.
I mean, it's funny. I mean, we could go through them all again, but we have. So,
I'll give you the last word, Mike. You can take it away.
All right. Because of the lost 18 minutes of the Watergate tapes, I did kind of a little bit more expand about who I am, because I know you had some listeners who were like, who is this Mike Frye guy? Well, I'm the first guy to tell you I'm not anything super special. I did play Division III basketball at the NCAA it used to be Otterbein College. It's now Otterbein University. We won the national championship in 2002. I idolized Michael Jordan just like most guys my age. Not in Ohio, by the way. He was hated in Ohio because I'm around a lot of Cavs fans. But Craig Elo just still fresh in their memory. But I have two kids that I adore. My wife as well, Margaret. She's they're my life. I'm a Christian guy. I'm a sports nut. I really am. I wouldn't say that I have the statistical knowledge that your host has, but I would say that I dabble a lot in a little in a lot of things, from politics to sports. I'm football wise. I love the game of football. Incredibly close to Colin Kaepernick on the quarterback analysis that's out there. I agree with him a lot. Not on Baker. I think he's completely wrong about Baker Mayfield.
Wait, you said Colin Kaepernick. Do you mean Colin Coward?
Oh, I mean Colin Coward. Sorry, Kaepernick was on my mind because he was demanding $20 million from the AAF, which I don't get. But
you're with Colin Kaepernick for his analysis.
He's a quarterback too. It's like, what the heck is this guy talking about? No, what I meant was Colin Cowherd, and how he, his list for quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger is the one that changed my idea, and I'll get onto this one when I begin a podcast, hopefully shortly through this network. When he was drafted by the Steelers instead of my Cleveland Browns. It changed my thinking on the quarterback position and its impact on teams that win championships. And so I'm kind of very passionate about that subject as well as the quarterback position. So that's kind of me in a snapshot. I am a writer. I'm not just a fan who wrote a book. So I've written some screenplays that we're shopping, and hopefully one day be made into films. And I write short stories, and my family makes humidors for the cigar industry. We've made some for, I won't name drop because I don't think that that's fair to them, but we've made some for some athletes, and so that's something that we're excited about. And so yeah, that's kind of me in a snapshot. So hopefully now you know a little bit more about me. I don't think I'm anything super special. I don't think I'm the most knowledgeable guy in the room. But I believe in 2019, anybody has the ability to go on to basketballreference.com and to watch a lot of games past and present and have a little bit more analytical knowledge about all sports, whether you played them or not, than people growing up in, say, the 70s and 80s who didn't have the access to the information that we have today. So I do think I could go toe-to-toe with Stephen A., especially when he says that Dwayne Haskins is going to be a runner in the NFL, and I don't know how he sees that. But I'll just drop that off there. He needs to go watch a little bit of Dwayne Haskins' tape so he knows that he's probably the most immobile quarterback I've seen in Ohio State in a long time. But that's just my point, is that a lot of fans today have a lot of knowledge, but a lot of fans also are taken to some of the fake news memes that are out there, and that's what drives me the most. That's what drove me to write Goat Envy, were the narratives, and dispelling that with more traditional data and context. So that's me in a nutshell. So take it away.
Yeah, no. The only thing I want to add to that is you said there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of resources out there, and because of that, there are no excuses for ignorant arguments. There really isn't. And if people are doing it just for attention, that's even less of an excuse, in my opinion. Mike, thank you very much for coming back on the show. As you guys may be aware, you might not be aware, but Mike is actually writing the introduction for More Than Six Rings. This is the latest book that I'm coming out with. Mike has seen parts of that. I'm not sure where he's up to in that, but that book should be coming up within a couple of weeks. It's almost done. It's almost completed. So I hold Mike in the highest of regards in terms of his knowledge. He'll say that he's not a special guy, and you know what? Who is? Who is any more special than anyone else? But the point that Mike humbly skips about that is his ability to be self-aware and to understand, and his humility when it comes to trying to learn. If I raise a point to Mike that he agrees with or he disagrees with, but he realizes it's valid, it's still valid to him. So I respect you a lot, Mike, and obviously if I didn't respect you, I wouldn't have asked you to write the introduction to the book. And the people that listen to this obviously respect you enough to care enough to ask who you are. And in addition to that, I'm looking forward to when we launch your football and sports podcast. We just need to think of a name. We should open that up to people that are listening. If you've got an idea for
Yeah.
Mike's podcast. What it should be called. I'm thinking Deep Frye because he used to be a shooter as well. So I mean, why not? But yeah, based off that chuckle, I think that's a winner, man. What are you laughing at, man?
I'm thinking about the guy who first gave me that nickname, and he's a character, and I love him to death. And he might be listening. I know he's listened to a couple of podcasts,
Okay.
but Asom, if you're listeing, man, I'll
Well, we got
never
a
live
winner,
it
man.
down.
We got a
You came up with it first. I don't know if it's a winner yet. I'm going to have to sign off on this.
Hey, you forget who runs this podcast, Mike. This is why you Deep Fry or you're sitting on the bench. One of the two. What do you want?
Well, let me say real quick, I'm humbled by the opportunity to write. I'll get a little technical on you. It is the forward for the book. So for us writer nerds that are out there, it's more of a forward. But I'm incredibly humbled to write it for this book. I'm excited to read the rest of it. And like Matt said, it should be coming out shortly. And I'm just very excited to be a part of that. And also, my own podcast under his umbrella. And I'm not sure, we have to still iron out those details, but I'm excited to bring you, a little bit more football than basketball. But, those are my two main sports. We won't be talking about Michael Phelps' records much on it. It's not really my style, or who won the NCAA wrestling championship last year. Not that I have anything against any of those things. It's just not my thing. But
Stop apologizing, man. Stop apologizing. You need to get thicker skin, Deep Fry. Well, you got that shooter's conscience. You don't. It doesn't matter if you miss 10 in a row. Your number 11's going in. But thanks. I appreciate you coming back on the show, guys. Check out. What was I going to say? Check out the social media pages: Facebook.com/I Still Love This Game, Instagram I Still Love This Game. We have a group up on Facebook as well, so if you guys want to actually have more of a forum where you can actually post things, you can do that too. I Still Love This Game.com for any archives. I have been receiving emails from people saying that they are unable to find previous episodes. What has actually happened is iTunes will only show 100 episodes. So if I had no idea how many people were still going to episode 104 or episode 4, excuse me, and trying to find that. So if any episode that I've referenced and it's not on iTunes, just go to istilllovethisgame.com and find it on there. And I am also aware that I'm not going to say we broke the servers, but sometimes the servers have been down because I've been putting up so many episodes and people are downloading them. So I am aware of that. That will be rectified. I apologize for that, but please be patient. Mike, thank you once again for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it.